I felt like we should talk about some more recent Impact news. Kind of out of left field, it caught me off guard. Scott D'Amore is no longer the president of Impact Wrestling / TNA, and I kind of assumed that was going to be his gig for life. They had all this momentum. It felt like they had just rebranded, had just such high remarks, excellent feedback, critical acclaim on their recent shows they did in Las Vegas. You got other stars who were recently departed from WWE, like Top Dollar, AJ Francis, and the former Dolph Ziggler, and Okada was at the freaking show. I mean, it was really, really amazing stuff, the momentum that they had. And now he's out. And the rumor and innuendo is a lot of the top talent there are not happy. Maybe those folks had opportunities to go to WWE or AEW, but they decided to re-sign with TNA because they felt like Scott had taken care of them and they knew their career was in good hands with Scott. But with Scott on the outside looking in, all of that comes into question. And I know you don't have any inside knowledge. You don't work there anymore. You're not a part of the organization, but you know Scott pretty damn well. And this is your baby, or once upon a time it was. What'd you think of that news about Scott D'Amore departing Impact?
What did I think of Scott D'Amore departing Impact? What day did that come out, Conrad? I'm just trying to think.
Last week.
Yeah, I know it's last week, but anyway, I had my phone was in my hand when I got a text that said, I can't believe this. What
Wednesday,
do you know?
Maybe it was Wednesday.
I'm not sure, but I can't believe this. What do you know? And I'm just like responded just because I was actively either texting or scrolling. I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Oh, you can't hear it. And then anyway, so as you are well aware, yeah, I have a unique perspective on this, but I have no context where to go with this, like at all. The all I can do is obviously share on my personal experience. And as I sat down and kind of drilled through everything and without knowing any of the details, and as things trickled out, you kind of hear, and I don't know what's true or not. But the one thing that was in there that he tried to buy it. And the reason I think, tried to buy it, if this is true, is that he wanted to spend more money. I think up the budgets and all that. And obviously, I've shared this on the podcast multiple times, and I took full responsibility for my screw ups. But the reality was, from day one, when I look back on my time, is that I was under the impression that budgets were going to be bigger. There was going to be more of an investment, if you will. The strategies were going to be different. And so in a lot of ways, I said, okay, that was in 2017 that we got together into 2016. We were basically finished by into 2017. So from 2018, it's safe to say, to beginning of 24, 6 years. I think you have to drill down into, I don't know the books, but the Asper family is very well to do, and they've made a lot of money through the years off of the television industry and cable and, Access and Pursuit. And they did the merger a couple of years ago, or the acquisitions, and Steve Harvey got involved. All that with being said, it drills right down to, I don't know what TNA's true EBITDA, P&L, they're like the real financials. What does that really look like? Because it's obviously Lynn's sole decision, Lynn Astor's sole decision. So I asked myself, what did the profit and loss look like over the last 6 years? Because there's no way that you do the rebrand and you have, and maybe it's just internet, but it felt like the most buzz on the company in the last 3 years, 4 years. It feels like coming out of the pandemic, maybe longer than that. They had quite a bit of buzz. I said it a couple of whenever we first reported on going back to TNA, what took them so long. I thought the Impact brand, just the timing of it all is very perplexing. That again, you don't ever judge a book by its cover, but I don't know what their financial picture looks like and the timing of it all. I'll say this. They've got their work cut out. No doubt. And nobody's irreplaceable. I mean, we're watching that right before our very eyes. Nothing, no talent, no executive, nobody's irreplaceable in this industry. That being said, what is their plan in place? Do you know? That's what I've yet to hear come out.
I forget the fellow who's taking his spot, but someone has
no,
his position. But
I know him. I worked with him back then, and I think he'll tell you right now, he is not a wrestling guy by any stretch of the imagination. And that he can be executive, and he is. But I just think at the very core, who is the wrestling guy? And I think that at the end of the day is that is an enormous component of who is steering the ship creatively.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see how this shakes out.
Again, I wish him well. I mean, I don't know, but, but it just surprised me of the timing of everything. And, Scott had the gig, quote unquote, 6 years. So I don't know. What's that real reality?
What's the over under on when you think Anthem sells Impact?
Good question. Now, Connie, I don't think you asked that unless you. I mean, to me,
Jeff, you reckon they're making any money
here? So what do they value an hour on Axis? Not just wrestling, any hour. What is an hour in prime time? There is a number. There is a metric that Axis puts on an hour of programming. I don't know what that is. Not going to pretend to know what that is. And then you can just kind of extrapolate out from there. So wrestling can be produced relatively inexpensive. And so unless you know something I don't know, I don't see them selling.
No, I do not know anything.
Okay.
But the rumor is we've heard for a while that they were interested in selling. I mean, that rumor's been out there. And there is an expression in business, good money after bad. So if losses are mounting, it feels like eventually they're going to say, okay, that's enough. Or as Conan would say, that's enough. And it's a question of where does the thing wind up? And I don't have any inside information. I haven't really talked to Scott outside of I sent a well-wish support text and he responded in kind, but there's been no significant conversation. But something I don't think a lot of the wrestling community knows is this is not Scott D'Amore's main business. Scott D'Amore is a very successful, boy, I don't like to throw this word around, but financially secure. Let me say that. That's a PC way to say it. Individual. I tend to think that he may have an opportunity to wind up with this thing one day. Because I don't know that WWE would buy it. So I don't know why AEW would buy it unless they were trying to launch a streaming service or something like that. So
people have asked me this quite a bit over the last few days. And I go back to the conversation that I've had kind of multiple times. And I had, we'll call it this education. Conrad, I'm going to go well north. I'm not even going to say 100, 200, 300, 400 times. I don't know how many times I've heard this conversation from my father, from my grandmother, from Jerry Lawler, from different folks through the years. what are you buying if you buy, I'll call it Anthem Wrestling Exhibitions. That's the last known entity that I know. That's who I went in partnerships with. What do you?
Right. Oh, well, I would think you're buying the library.
Okay. What else?
Well, I mean, they probably got some rings. They
Okay.
probably got some production stuff.
Used.
Maybe there's some performer contracts. And I guess the question becomes, would they also include time on their television station?
Okay.
That's the big wrinkle, right?
Well, time on their television station is kind of by far the most valuable thing.
Sure, no doubt.
Because
But
usually
how much is that really worth, if we're honest?
that my point.
Yeah.
That's my whole point. The library, and it's. I'm not saying, but I mean, it's you really talk about, and thank God there are lots of folks out there that like to watch catalogs of wrestling, but the monetization of it comes from subscription services, which is small, and the WWE numbers, once you drill down on the real value of watching a 88 Starrcade or a 90, 95 Mania or whatever it may be, it's not near enough to sustain, an operation. So that it's looking, Jesus, you talking about him. And Karen and me had this conversation. She's like, because I've started reading stuff and people were calling me quite a bit, much more than I expected. And she would hear the phone conversation. She's just like, what, she has something. And I'm like, for whatever reason, starting that, the emotional attachment, the ups and the downs of all of it, I still have an affinity to it. So I'm very curious of where it's going to go. But unless, well, I mean, you can take any other network out there. They're just going to start their own. I'm curious to see. That's why I don't think they sell. I think it sits in Lynn Asper family until he's really ready to let go of that library. And I don't, to my knowledge, he wouldn't, because it's much more valuable to create content for his own networks. I don't know.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens.
It is.
I for one, don't think that this, I think it's inevitable that Scott D'Amore winds up doing something in wrestling, and I, for one, am here to see it.
Something I don't know. It's interesting.
No, I don't. But I mean, I'm just saying, like, the loyalty he has from a lot of those guys. I mean, as you know, my man wasn't doing this to pay the light bill. So he's doing it because he really loved it, and he makes a lot more money doing everything else in his life.
Yeah.
So
his family business, I like to say.
There you go.
I said he's got a family businesses.
Yes. So I'm just saying, realistically, every time, every hour he spent away from that business on wrestling, he was losing money.
Yeah.
So clearly he's eat up with the bug. He's eat up with it.
Yeah.
And he can't shake loose of it. So I think he'll be back. It's a question of where does he land? And I think he'd have opportunities at AEW. I also think he'd have opportunities with WWE or a few other places, but it feels like he maybe wants to chart his own course. If you're reading Mike Johnson's reports, because Mike even speculated that he tried to buy the thing himself, and I guess they decided they didn't want to sell. And I just think cooler heads prevail, and maybe if that was a no before, it turns into a yes with time. So here we are on February 12th, recording this just before noon, and I'm going to say within the next 12 months.
Okay.
We see Scott D'Amore doing something else, and he may or may not be the eventual owner.
Okay. I could buy that. Time. Yeah. Time is a funny, unique salve.
Well, yeah. I mean, once upon a time, you guys, I mean, you were standing across the courtroom from Scott. And then if we get a few years behind us, and then y'all are on stage cutting up at one of our Top Guy events or at adfreeshows.com. And I just, I don't think we're done yet. I think there's more to come.